All right, guys. Thanks for everyone who is back in here listening to another episode of the Hawks Film Room podcast. Zach here. Got Sarah Spencer, Hawks beat reporter for Atlanta Journal-Constitution on today. How you doing, Sarah?
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Appreciate you coming on. So Hawks are obviously now, you probably know this by now if you're listening to this, are picking sixth or have the number six pick in the 2020 NBA draft. What were your general takeaways of the Hawks basically, landing in their most likely draft slot?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just kind of said it there. With the lottery, everyone gets, understandably really excited for that number one pick, and the Hawks did have a decent shot at it. I mean, pretty much the fourth best odds to get it, and they had a pretty decent chance of going top five, but then I kind of always thought that they would land at either number six or number seven. I mean, they had over a 25% chance to get at number six. So this is kind of what I thought would happen. But understandably, people get excited and I get that. But this is kind of what I thought would happen. And Travis Schlenk said that too in his kind of initial reaction. He said, the disappointment would be going at number seven or number eight, which I definitely agree with. But I think moving forward, what this does, I think this is fine. I think this is fine for the Hawks. But what it do is, just like missing out on that number one slot, it does take away those guys who are, there's not necessarily a consensus number one pick going into this draft, but it takes away the guys who are in the conversation for that, most likely. So your Anthony Edwards, your Wiseman, your LaMelo Ball, like guys like that. Now you can kind of most likely not necessarily kind of cross them off the list and talk about the other guys who are, maybe look more like role players, but that doesn't mean they can't be very useful for a team like the Hawks. And, you can hit on those guys too. So I think it's a fine situation for them to be in. And I think it was, the most likely one as well.
Of course. I agree. I think, anytime you actually, look at the odds, like we click over here, you see, I mean, they basically had almost the same chance as Golden State or Cleveland or Minnesota. So it's easy to see why people get excited when you look at that. But at the same time, that's only going to be one team jumping up there. So, like you said, Travis Schlenk, being in his position, he understands like there's no point in really getting excited or getting too focused. Like you saw a lot of Anthony Edwards Hawks talk in the last few weeks. Now all that was, basically pointless in 1 second. So, like you said, LaMelo Ball, Wiseman potentially, depending. I think Wiseman is one guy who could slip to six, but I do think it's obviously unlikely. So yeah, I mean, like you said, there's definitely those top two guys you can kind of cross off now, and like Schlenk said, in his availability, he is going to start focusing on meetings with guys he thinks will be around the number six pick. And he did offer a little bit of insight into the Hawks' strategy. It's nothing surprising, but he noted that the Atlanta Hawks will be, if they are staying at number six to select, they will be pursuing the best player available regardless of position. Obviously, you probably weren't surprised to hear that, but do you think that even includes someone like Cole Anthony at North Carolina as kind of a point guard backcourt player if he sees Cole Anthony as the best player available at number six and no one offers a trade? Do you think that's something he would actually do?
Possibly. I mean, the Hawks are going to need, I think they're kind of going to need another ball handler behind Trey. I think the thing that is kind of tough sometimes with Trey is when you're talking about getting a guard, you have to have someone who can play both behind him and alongside him, just because of how much he does play. So yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that happening. I also think that the Hawks definitely need. I think they hopefully. I mean, it's going to depend on who's available, but maybe someone like Devin Vassell from Florida State, just kind of someone who's going to improve them on defense too, which I mean, I know they struggled shooting last year, and that's certainly true. It even feels strange to say last year. I feel like I've lost all concept of time, like with like last season, and then it was cut short, and now who even knows when next season's going to start? Which Travis hinted at, or with which Adam Silver said as well, that the season might end up getting pushed back from the projected start date of December 1st. So yeah, but I mean, I could even see someone like Devin Vassell, because I like fitting in with them pretty well, and I think that is someone who's maybe realistic for them at number 6. Just because I think even though they struggled shooting last season, they also really struggled defensively, and it was kind of difficult to watch sometimes just how much they struggled defensively. And so I could see someone like Devin Vassell. I could see someone like Isaac Okoro, although he might actually go sooner than that. It sounds like a lot of teams rather are pretty high on him. But yeah, I mean, Travis has said from the beginning, he's been pretty consistent with the best player available strategy if they do keep the pick. And he's also said a couple times that they're pretty committed to it. Obviously, if someone like gives you an offer you can't refuse, so to speak, then of course they'll entertain that. And he said tonight, they'll entertain, moving up, moving down, whatever. But he's also said before that they're pretty committed to it unless they get a pretty good offer.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. For those of you who read PeachtreeHoops.com, I wrote a little bit of a write-up of Travis's press conference tonight. Sarah will obviously, as a beat reporter, will have something covering that as well. So be sure to read all that for everything Schlenk said. But just kind of scrolling over, to some of the transcript. I mean, Sarah's right. He's focused in on adding another young talent to the roster. He knows the Hawks are not ready to achieve their ultimate team goals right now, and that another young player, basically almost a top 5 pick, could be someone who is one of the best 3 or 4 players from this draft easily when it's all said and done, if you get the right guy at number 6. So he seemed excited and just ready to go into the preparation. She did talk a little bit about the preparation as well, noting that there's going to be a lot more meetings total because of the lack of travel. But there will be virtual Zoom meetings right now for the as far as the NBA has said that they don't want prospects flying around traveling to every team due to obviously the pandemic, COVID-19. So he seemed disappointed that he hadn't seen a few guys a little more. Seemed disappointed the conference tournaments got canceled, but he did seem encouraged that he's going to be able to speak to a lot more of the prospects. So, this weird place we're in all sports and just in, society and everything, he seemed in about as good of a place as you could be heading, into this process.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's really all you can do. And the good news is, pretty much everyone's in the same boat right now, at least as far as those teams that are lottery teams that we're talking about tonight. Pretty much like very few things are happening in person right now. So everyone's kind of in the same boat of just doing Skype interviews or Zoom or, whatever your digital video chat platform of choices. And then, they might try to do the virtual kind of like a combine of sorts, but that's still getting worked out. And Travis didn't even know too much about that tonight, which is understandable. So yeah, I mean, it sucks. It's difficult, but he has said a couple times that that's really helping them, that they've been able to talk to so many guys because you take out the logistics of having to fly to like be in person,
Right.
So that's in a way that's good. But at this point, I think they're probably happy that they now you can just start having conversations with those guys because you know where you're picking, and you can just kind of start having more concrete conversations about it now. And I think that's probably very welcome, especially considering the Hawks haven't had much concrete to talk about since March 11th. And so it's probably good to just kind of like get that under your belt and move forward. And, they're going to be able to do some stuff in person when they open up the practice facility in September for like I think it's going to end up being 2 weeks of team workouts or so, which that'll help them too. And I mean, they just, with as young as they are, every little bit will help them. So I think there's a couple things that are kind of steps in the right direction for them.
Right. Transition back to, the draft specifically. ESPN put out a mock draft tonight following the lottery. They have, we can kind of go through it real quick. They have LaMelo going number 1 to the Wolves. Anthony Edwards going to the Warriors, which would likely be a trade. Woj has been screaming on ESPN that the Warriors want to trade their pick. James Wiseman going 3 to Charlotte, who jumped up into the top 4, and then Chicago, who also jumped in the top 4. They have selecting Obi Toppin. 5, Cleveland, Denny Avdija. And then you get down to the 6th pick, and you kind of see some of that best player available mindset, in this mock with the Hawks selecting Onyeka Okongwu with the 6th pick, who some people, within league circles think he, they know he's more advanced than Wiseman right now. Some of them just think he might be just better at basketball. Not as big, not the super, prodigy like size and wingspan, but he is only 19 years old and he dominated in the Pac-12 this year. Mm-hmm. There's also, the depth issue with the Hawks. I think the fit concerns are overrated. I personally do, because you have Collins and Capella and Dedmon and Bruno, but all of those guys have, missed time at some point. Mm-hmm. And I think, the logic with that is, with the Okongwu, is like, this probably means the ESPN has some sort of intel that the Hawks are really high on him, just in general, not necessarily like for their team, but they like him. Kind of like there was a report that they like Okoro. And by the way, Okoro in this did not go until 8 to the Knicks, so Okoro would have been there. Mm-hmm. So this means that, whatever this mock is, if it's sourcing intel, this means that Okongwu, obviously if it's already known that the Hawks like Okoro, they have them picking Okongwu. So obviously, you could put 2 and 2 together and sort of assume that there's at least something out there that says would suggest the Hawks like Okongwu.
Can I ask? So I'm not looking at that. Where did they have Obi Toppin go?
Okay. Obi Toppin went 4th to Chicago.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that that's probably that means that there's people who have said that they are that they like Okongwu, and I mean, really there's not too much not to like. I mean, he's kind of, I think it was The Ringer who kind of compared him to maybe Bam Adebayo a little bit, just like having a lot of versatility, for his size. So I mean, I don't dispute that. I don't necessarily think they should take a big, but I don't think that would be, I don't think there's anything wrong with that projection. I mean, I think it makes a little bit more sense to take a wing, but but I mean, it as far as best player available, I mean, if that's who they have confidence in, then that's what they'll end up doing.
Right. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think Schlenk, it just really goes for the future. So I don't think he's going to worry about, you could even kind of hear it in the presser today where like someone kind of asked him to make a playoff declaration the way Lloyd Pierce and John Collins did in March. And he kind of didn't do it. He said, we want him. We're ready to win. We're going to prepare to win. I'm paraphrasing. He didn't say this exactly, but he kind of just said, we're focused on winning this season while we're getting better. He didn't say like, playoffs are bust. He actually did say something directly like this, like, I'm not going to say playoffs are bust.
Yeah, he said, I think the expectation for all of us is we want to continue to see our team improve. And then he mentioned, adding players, whether it's through the draft, through free agency. And then he mentioned, the Hawks' young core. He said, obviously, we went out and got more deadline, and that's referring to Clint Capella. And then he said, so I think it's fair to say that we do want to see our group start to improve on the court as far as wins and losses go. I wouldn't necessarily say put the pressure on them or anyone that it's playoffs or bust, but we do want to see our group improving on the floor for sure. Sorry to cut you off. I had actually just transcribed that, so I wanted to.
No, yeah, I appreciate it.
Wanted to help you out there. But yeah, so I mean, it is interesting, and I've talked to Travis a handful of times, and he said something to that effect a handful of times too, which is definitely shy of what Lloyd Pierce has said, what Jamie Gertz has said, which is that she hopes it's her last time picking in the lottery, which would obviously mean they're making the playoffs. Lloyd Pierce has said that too. John Collins has said that as well. So Travis is the one who, not to say those other people are not being patient, because it has been, 3 years of missing the playoffs and, heading to the lottery. But Travis is the one that is sort of, I don't know if pumping the brakes is the right term, but just being a little bit more patient and not wanting to necessarily rain down with talk of playoffs just yet, for sure.
Yeah, I think ultimately, he's the one who, if he says that, he's going to have to answer to it. So, I mean, Pierce and Collins will all have to answer to it, but John Collins is not going to get fired probably if the Hawks miss the playoffs. He might get traded, but right. I'm not saying anyone's going to get fired if they miss the playoffs. I'm just saying if Schlenk goes all in, saying telling ownership that, we're a 50-win team, we're making the playoffs, and then it doesn't happen, that is probably not what he wants to do.
It's definitely the worst look if he does that. And I think, and he's also the one who's building the roster, so it's kind of directly on his shoulders. So I agree that he's just kind of being, a little bit more cautious with his wording, maybe. I mean, he did say they want him to improve with wins and losses, but they said that this past season as well. And that obviously didn't happen. And some of that is their season got cut short by 15 games. And some of it was that the beginning of the beginning of this past season was so bad.
Right. Yeah. The other interesting things, just back to this mock for a second. Some other Hawks targets, Devin Vassell did not go to 11th till the Spurs. And Killian Hayes, who some people have in the top 5, ESPN has him going 14 to Boston. Cole Anthony, 15 to Orlando. Both of those guys, you can see them in the top 10 a lot of places. ESPN has them going towards almost out of the top 15.
Man, and I think some of that is this draft is just kind of weird. It's kind of weird. It's not bad. It's just odd. There's a lot of guys who, Travis spoke to this too, where you just didn't get to see, how, you get to the NCAA tournament and guys kind of go off a little bit, and you see guys that maybe people didn't know their name before. And then it's like Dante DiVincenzo, for example. And it's just oh, wow, this dude can really play. Carson Edwards is another example. Oh, wow, this guy can really play. And so you don't get to see that this year. So he just kind of spoke to having less film on them, or I think he said books, just having less on these guys. And then, I mean, I think this draft has a lot of guys who have a lot of potential, but it's just kind of hard to put your finger on the pulse exactly of how it's going to shake out. And maybe some of that is it just starts at the top and there's not necessarily that consensus number one. There's not a Zion waiting there. And then it kind of throws off everything beneath it as well. But it's just kind of an odd draft of figuring out exactly how things are going to shake out.
Right. Yeah, I agree. It's definitely just, kind of, I think the lack of play kind of later in the season, as far as amateur and collegiate, or other professional leagues and collegiate, it just kind of didn't allow people to separate themselves. So, like you said about DiVincenzo, people already liked him. They already, liked his, NBA potential, but him kind of going through the tournament and becoming the lead guy is what, put him past some other people. So like him taking over a national championship team kind of vaulted him probably, 5 to 7 spots at least. So that, was not able to happen. So I think there's going to be just madness, honestly. Like when you look 5 years from now, you know, that someone who's, the second, third, and fourth best player might all be outside of the top 10. Like we don't know. Um, five
Yeah,
years
because
from
like conference championships and the tournament, I agree. It's like you kind of like solidify your name, maybe like your odds. You kind of like solidify yourself in those because those are like the biggest games you're gonna play in college. So if you want to talk about like being able to handle that kind of environment, like that's kind of when it happens, at least for college guys. But yeah, I agree. It wouldn't surprise me if this draft got kind of weird when it
right. Yeah, I think
when it came
that's
down to it.
that's the summary here is that this draft is not great and going to be weird like everything else in 2020. So we could leave it at that. One last thing I wanted to ask you about before we get out of here. Obviously, you're someone who covers the team, as close as anyone, pretty much. So, one of the big things Hawks fans are concerned about, or thinking about in this time where they're not really playing, is if the team is going to extend John Collins before the final year on his contract. Just a quick summary. I talked about this with Brad Rowland on the debut episode of this podcast a few days ago, but Collins has basically $4 million on his contract next year. So he has a lot of incentive to want to get an extension done and secure, the bag, 90, $100 million max contract, whatever he asked for. He has a lot of incentive to want to get that done because obviously the risk is all on him right now. The team, however, has no risk right now and has no incentive to get the deal done. So just kind of offer, where you think each sides are respectively and kind of, what chance you think something actually would happen before the Hawks play again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's hard. And I understand like what you said, John like has such incentive to get something done. He's been very, very vocal about wanting to get a deal done this summer as opposed to letting it, going into that kind of like quote unquote contract year and then having to figure it out next summer. And I even asked him what if, because he's talked a little bit about feeling like he, should be in the conversation for a max deal. But I even asked him, what if you got an offer that wasn't necessarily like a max deal, but it was something that, was still a good chunk of change. And then, like basically like, what do you want more, like getting that max deal or getting something tied up this summer? And he didn't, I don't know if he like answered it necessarily directly. He just kind of emphasized that he really wanted to get something done this summer. But I think if you're the Hawks, especially considering that John season before last was hurt for a decent bit of it. That was before I was here. I think it was his ankle. He was injured for a little bit. And then this past season, I mean, he was suspended for 25 games. So yes, he was putting up historic numbers and was very, very key for them, really kind of turning things around at the end of the season, which when you look at their final record, it doesn't show that much because they started the season out. They had like 8 wins, for a while there in the season. But I think if you're the Hawks, I think that because it's not like he did that all season long. It really hurt them for him to be gone for 25 games. And you want to see him do that on like the biggest sample size possible before you give out, even if it's not a max deal, before you give out, a lot of money. Because you can do that, and then that doesn't pan out. And I think Travis has been pretty, I don't know if cautious is the word, but, trying to be strategic with how he, with how he builds this roster. So I think I understand why John, would really want to get something done this summer. But I think for the Hawks, it might make sense. And like you said, they don't have much to lose by waiting, because, you go into this next season, which whenever that might start, and you see what he can do, for a full season with an improved roster, which is already improved, with Clint there, and Dwayne to an extent as well. And this pick, if they keep it, and just a team that's not so green and so young. So I think from the Hawks perspective, I kind of agree that they don't really have much to lose by waiting.
Yeah, I mean, I would pretty much guess there's a 0% chance the Hawks offer Collins the max a year early.
Yeah, I mean
he might get the max eventually, but he's not getting it this year. So, I think we covered that as well. I think it kind of is what it is at this point. If something happens, it'll be something that is more team friendly. More team friendly than a max, at least, and it'll be something obviously that Collins will have to feel good enough about to secure himself into. So everyone, go follow Sarah. Sarah, you can go ahead and plug yourself. I really appreciate you coming on and doing this late at night here on Thursday night.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. Thanks so much for having me on. So my Twitter handle's weird because I have a really common name, but it's Sarah_K_Spence on Twitter. And just keep in touch with everything happening at the AJC. But yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Zach.
Yeah, definitely. Again, appreciate you coming on. Everyone, like, subscribe, rate, whatever, wherever you're listening to this podcast. We appreciate you listening. We appreciate, all your support, downloads, everything. Follow at Hawks Film Room on Twitter, Peachtree Hoops. Check all that stuff out. Appreciate it, guys.